Great. Thanks, Paul. It looks like it's going to be a very interesting couple of days. And for me, it's going to go from being turned into a cartoon, apparently, all the way through to Paul talking about Rocky Balboa, which I can't wait for tomorrow, Friday afternoon. And while Paul was stressing the point there that really the purpose of this type of event is not to create anxiety, fear, uncertainty, and doubt within the audience, having attended and presenting at a few of these things myself in the past, let's face it, that's what it does. I'm feeling anxious already, having seen some of the stuff that Paul has presented. But when I was preparing this, I was hoping to really emphasize that the battle is worth fighting and the battle is worth winning. So while there is a world of threat out there, and maybe to paraphrase Bill Cullen, we need warriors. We do need people actually thinking about these things and taking some time to try and counteract the various threats that we'll be hearing about in great detail over the next couple of days. I think it's important that we focus on why we're doing this, why it's important, and certainly from a business perspective, I want to talk about 3 technology areas, which Paul has already introduced as the main themes of this event, and really to emphasize their importance and their criticality for Ireland in general. So what are they? Cloud. So the usual picture of a sheep that we normally draw when we've got something nebulous to present. And yes, cloud is yet again on the agenda at an IT-related event. But again, I think cloud is going to have an absolutely profound impact on the industry. I'm not the first person to have said that. But I really do believe it can have a profound impact economically in Ireland for very specific reasons, which we'll go through in a moment, hopefully. Mobile. Mobile is massive. Start thinking about the device in your pocket as a computer. Stop thinking about it as a phone. And as somebody who works for a, quote, phone company, it's a difficult thing for me to say, but we have to stop thinking about this device purely as a phone. It's an IT device which runs multiple applications, and one of those applications happens to be a very important one called voice. And social media. Does anybody know who this is? Well done. First prize of the day goes to the man who knows that this is Nicki Minaj. And I want to talk about social media later on as an area that really gives a good sense of how potentially outside of control you are around some of these major trends that are happening out there in the industry. So sometimes you'll get a naive organization saying, I don't really need to be engaging on social media. It's nothing to do with me. I don't have to get involved. And I know one financial institution I would have met late last year, and somebody brought them the statistics of what conversations were taking place about their brand that they were completely unaware of, and the amount of activity. They sort of presumed that people aren't interested in us on Twitter or on Facebook. A lot of people were interested in them on Facebook and Twitter. And in fact, some of the more vocal contributors talking about them on those channels, if you picked into who they were actually spokespeople for their competitors. So again, if you look at the broader threat landscape, I think social media is very important. Now, the theme of the conference is clearly security. So we're looking at how to contend and deal with all these various risks. And that's in addition, or in supplementary to the day-to-day challenge that you have of dealing with the rapidly changing and evolving threat landscape driven by commerce, driven by those themes that Paul outlined earlier on. This is all about making money or making a name for yourself within a particular hacktivist community. Unfortunately, I had to put Gartner in there. It's an IT event, so you have to quote Gartner at some point. I think it's official. But if you look at these priorities in terms of CIO priority lists around the world, you'll note there that cloud is 3, mobile is 2. Social media is just outside because I think these organizations are kind of conservative and they haven't quite twigged how important it's going to be for them. And certainly if you looked at consumer-centric organizations in retail, it'd be much higher priority. And security, thankfully, is just into the top 10. It hasn't been in the top 10 for a number of years, but it's back in there now. Now, I have to address this point. I'm here as eircom talking about security. We have clearly got a perspective on this, and we play in all these various areas, but I am aware of people in glass houses, shouldn't be throwing stones. And again, happy to go into the detail of any issue that you may want to talk about in terms of eircom later on down at the stand. But we have a very important part to play in the fabric, I think, of communications in the country, very much in cloud, in mobile, and our own experience in social media I'm going to outline today. Let's look at cloud first off. The two reasons that people say they've no intention of moving to cloud in the short term tend to be something nebulous called security, and the second one is networking. So taking the second one first in terms of networking, the commentary tends to be, to access cloud services, I'll be going across the internet. I don't particularly trust the internet. I know it's very reliable, but it's not got the same kind of quality and performance, guarantees, layers of encryption. It doesn't have all of the privacy and partitioning that I'm typically used to with corporate networking. And I'd like to have that if I'm going to be putting all of my assets and resources up into something called the cloud. And clearly that's something that is of interest, keen interest to eircom. And I'll tell you in a moment what we're going to do in that regard. In terms of security, there's often a presumption that cloud in itself is inherently less secure than what you have at the moment. So your status quo situation, the servers that you have in either your own private data center or comms room, wherever they might be, there's a presumption that that's good, that you're already secure in what you're doing. And frequently, you don't have any external validation of that. So you perhaps haven't gone to the process of getting somebody to look at this in relation to a well-known standard like ISO 27001, or you haven't had any reason to consider whether your applications have been architected correctly to deal with the new demands or cloud demands going forward. Interestingly enough, if you look at something like Google Apps, Google Apps itself has got ISO 27001 certification. It's not an easy thing to get or to acquire or to hold. And it's very interesting that you see, again, a service like that has that kind of certification within the last year. And if you use that service, you're inheriting the amount of care and attention that's gone into establishing that credibility. Now, that doesn't in any way remove your obligation to be responsible for your own data. So again, I've been at events on cloud in the past where there's been a naive suggestion that's great, I can abdicate all responsibility for my security because it's now in the, quote, cloud provider's network. You know, that's absolutely not the case. You always remain responsible ultimately for your own data. But the point I'm making here is don't make the presumption that because it's in the cloud, because you can't touch and feel it and know where the server is, that it's any less resilient, robust, or secure than your own system. In many ways, it may be superior. That's certainly true, I believe, of Amazon Web Services. So Google Apps is a software as a service. Amazon Web Services is an infrastructure as a service. So it does what you could otherwise do by going out and buying some boxes yourself and putting them into a data center to give yourself what one of my customers calls grunt, processing power and storage. You can get that from Amazon on tap, and you can get it essentially on a worldwide basis. But what I find particularly impressive about Amazon Web Services is the amount of external validation that they have of the condition of their cloud and how it's monitored and managed on an ongoing basis. Again, I'm not sure within the audience how familiar you would be with these various accreditations. I'm sure some of you will be very familiar with them. But again, getting to this level of accreditation is far from easy. It's a difficult task. And this level of accreditation within Amazon is worldwide. It's for all of their various availability zones. So for instance, the SOC 1 Type 2, which replaces SAS 70, allows you to put your financial information within the Amazon web cloud, and you're not in any way mitigating or reducing the resilience and the assurance that you have around that data. In many ways, you may be enhancing it. So, in parallel with the growth of cloud and the wave of interest in cloud, we obviously had the events. We marked the anniversary, the 11th anniversary recently of the horrendous 9/11 attacks. And I think in parallel with cloud, we've had the ongoing and unfolding response to those terrible events. And one of the responses from the US government was the Patriot Act, which basically gave them the teeth to go after essentially electronic wiretap and data retrieval to support their efforts to prevent the recurrence of 9/11 type events and incidents. And what I have observed in Ireland over the last number of years, certainly there was a theme for a while where the observation was being made that I can't put my data into the cloud. The cloud is really run by American companies. If I go onto an American company's cloud, they'll just use the Patriot Act willy-nilly with the CIA, and all my data will be picked over by God knows who, and I'll have no control over that. Now, I normally am the most paranoid person in the room. I know today at this type of event, I certainly won't be. I'm sure there'll be much more paranoid people out there. But I thought it was very interesting in the last year that A&L Goodbody, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but A&L Goodbody looked at the overall concern here related to the Patriot Act because it was coming up as a very frequent, almost throwaway comment as to why people shouldn't consider the cloud. And they decided they'd look into this in a bit of detail. And some of the quotations from them. The first one observes the progressive market and legal ecosystem that exists within Ireland here. So basically saying that we have the right structure in place to foster and encourage cloud business. That seems to be the case. And again, I'd make the point that economically, we have a huge advantage in Ireland that we seem to have failed to have grasped at this point. Pretty much all of the major cloud providers are operating their European availability zones out of this country. That has to be a phenomenal economic benefit to the nation. I would be challenging indigenous industry and indigenous enterprise companies to grasp this and to really consider what it could do for them. I can think of many other countries in Europe who would be delighted to have this kind of cloud infrastructure based within the territory. But more interestingly enough, when they picked into the specifics of the Patriot Act, they found that, you can read it there yourself, there's no additional legal risk, there's no specific concerns or powers being conferred that you have to worry about, and there are no cloud-specific jurisdictional issues that arise either. So essentially, it's a great read if you like legal terms, but essentially they're saying it's a non-issue in terms of the location of your data. I always look to government to see what they're doing here. When I say about not being the most paranoid person in the room, I know some people in government that really would definitely qualify for that, no matter what room they were in, and it's a good thing. It's important that they're giving very careful consideration of this. And I was delighted to see that in the cloud strategy document published over the summer, there was a very strong endorsement of the applicability and the suitability of cloud to support public-facing and non-sensitive activity. And I guess that's going to support the whole open data movement, which I think will be, again, profoundly important in how we see public services in the coming years. However, and there always is a however on things like this when you look at a cloud strategy from government, they also have a comprehensive 16-point list in Annex 2 of the criteria for public cloud selection. And I fell on this thinking, great, I'm looking forward to seeing how all of these pan out. But unfortunately, that's the entirety of Annex 2. It's a list of words at this point. Now, thankfully, it's a priority in terms of the first year of activity within government to put meat on this and to describe, well, what are the criteria for considering, for instance, architecture or application design, which is as it should be. I've observed before that when you have a cloud outage and you have maybe a high-profile site that's been off the air, typically when you pick into the details of the outage and the outage report, you'll find that the application has not been architected specifically with the cloud in mind. Someone has taken it, popped it onto the cloud, just as it would have been in their own private data center. And therefore, they haven't availed of any of maybe the location-based failover or any of the inherent resilience that you can get when you have multiple global data centers at your disposal. So what's eircom doing in this space? There's two types of cloud. One is a private cloud. It's a cloud that you construct specifically for one group of users or one application or one community. and typically it's not available to the public. It's not available on a global basis. And we've been constructing those type of private clouds for organizations in finance, in services like engineering consultancy, and most notably in education. So the Classroom 2000 cloud that we've built in Northern Ireland with our partners in Northgate is actually the largest educational cloud in Europe at this point. Again, that's been implemented by eircom. But we recognize that for flex, for scalability, for on-demand responsiveness, we really have to consider how we're going to gain from the investments being made by others, and also this interesting overlap of Ireland and the big players, and particularly Amazon. So you will see an announcement probably in the next couple of weeks related to what eircom is doing with Amazon Web Services. What we will hope to do there, what we will do there, is avail of that scalability, that massive economy that they have, the compute point that we can get to, and at the same time address the point I made earlier on about security being a concern and networking being a concern. That line that links the private cloud and the public cloud on Amazon, that's where we can really come to the fore and remove some of that concern with our customers. Mobile. The reason why the Mars Curiosity rover is my poster boy for mobile is the old example we used to give of the power of the smartphone used to be that the typical smartphone processing power was more than what NASA had to put somebody on the moon. So here's an updated example. The processing power on the Mars Curiosity rover is less than your typical iPhone. That's before you get an iPhone 5. Now, it must be said that the battery life on the Mars Curiosity rover is substantially better. But the point I'm making here is that you have a phenomenal amount of processing power on your person when you have a smartphone. And again, I think we have to stop thinking about the phone piece as being the important part of the smartphone name. And again, it's difficult for me to say that, but we have to consider it that way. Within our own base, we've got 1 million subscribers on the Meteor eMobile network, and about 33% of those users are now on smartphones, and that number is just ramping up day by day. And about 70% are on Android, and about 25% are on Apple, and then we've got about 2% each on RIM and on Windows. But as Paul alluded to earlier on, really the crime will follow the value that's out there in terms of the opportunity. And some recent statistics from the Garda Síochána were indicating, first, this isn't a cyber crime as such, it's just theft of devices, but you've got 6,000 mobile phones stolen in the year to July, and that's up 20%. So it's probably tracking on the increased number of smartphones that are out there. But the key point here is, what's on that phone? It's not just a phone. It's almost, at this point, the equivalent of your wallet. There's all sorts of information crammed into it. Contact details. You probably have a PIN number for your card somewhere written on a little bit of a Post-it note down the back of the wallet. Maybe that's just me. But you've got all sorts of bits of interesting information that gather on your phone, which typically in the past would have been perhaps in a physical form in a wallet. So if somebody gets a hold of that device, they've got some interesting information. And that's just for the standard, normal, domestic consumer. When you talk about the enterprise or government customer, the person who's using this for their work, we have the concept of secure access. So for many years now, we've been using APN-type services to tether a mobile phone into the corporate network. So think of it, it's almost the same as you saying, well, that laptop can just connect into your corporate network, don't worry about it. Connect in whatever you want to go. Don't worry, sure, it's very important that you have that device. Clearly, as security professionals, we would never have allowed that to happen. We considered how that laptop device was secured before we allowed it untrammeled access into the corporate network. Are we taking the same care and precautions to do with smartphone devices, particularly phones that are very attractive for theft? Let's move back into the cyber world for a second. Crime follows into the cyber world from the real world. So, Paul mentioned earlier on the concern about, the condition and where did an application come from? Is an application what you thought it was when you download it and load it onto your phone? I think these stats here from eircom are quite alarming. 40% of the top 15 free Apple iOS apps and 80% of the top 15 free Android apps, they've been found in the wild, in other words, on people's phones, in a hacked form. So the user is unaware that this is actually not the same piece of software as they originally downloaded from the Android store or from the Apple store. So the question is, what modifications have been made? Do we know what modifications have been made? What's the intention? And clearly, in some cases, the intentions will be criminal. And we really have to contend with this and deal with it. How are we going to handle both the usefulness and the validity of having such a powerful device like a smartphone connected into your corporate network, and at the same time not leave this a gaping hole into your organization? And just as we've been concerned in the past of laptop theft, yes, I'll go there, we have to be mindful now also of smartphone theft or loss of smartphone. What information is on that device? So in the past, within eircom, initially with our field force, for instance, we had cellular connections from Toughbook type devices. So again, it's clearly still almost a PC or laptop type device that we can see. But over time, we moved our field force to BlackBerry RIM devices. And that was because BlackBerry really were ahead of the game. They were providing a cloud service, a cloud security service to do with corporate mobile communications. I think the fact that the poster boy for RIM is Obama, the fact that he managed to convince the NSA to allow him keep his BlackBerry, I think is very impressive and indicative also of maybe the personal bond that people establish with a particular type of technology. That's part and parcel, I think, of the whole bring your own device trend, which is saying, well, actually, I like this device. This is the device that I myself will choose to use within an organization. And I think, unlike any time in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, that trend has been gaining momentum to the point where there was, I think, a point in time where a security person in an IT department could say, no, we're not allowing you use that, or that. You can have this instead. Those days are clearly gone. I think now it's a case of, why can't you support the type of device that I'm prepared to use myself? It's a huge challenge because not only do you have to consider different operating systems running on different type of mobile devices, maybe even within one type of operating system like Android, you've got to consider all the various different flavors of that. And to put a common security architecture over all of these things is difficult. I know some of the other speakers at the event in the next couple of days will talk about this. We have our own approach and our own play in this space too. Clearly, as an organization offering corporate mobile services, we need to have a way of addressing this risk and this concern. It's got to work across a whole variety of platforms. I don't go into the detail of it, but you've got to consider the asset management benefit of knowing where everything is. Where are these devices? What's on them? Can you selectively wipe maybe the corporate information, leave private personal information operating at the same time? Knowing where a device was at a particular time, limiting what applications can be downloaded and installed when you consider that whole risk of how hacked some of those applications might be, particularly from the Android store. So yes, an area I think that's hugely important, but at the same time, let's remember the power, the utility of the mobile phone and its impact and positive impact on business. Nicki Minaj, social media. These are some statistics from our social listening. So we use a technology called Lithium to listen to what's going on out there within social channels. We listen for information about how our customers are perceiving us. We listen to see how our customers are perceiving our competitors, because again, it's all public information. We can compare and contrast that kind of info. And I'll draw your attention here to a couple of things. Down at the bottom, we've got frequent word analysis across all of the social mentions of eircom brands for a particular period of time. And there's two positives to it. First positive is that 16% of the words is thanks, which is good. So sometimes people would think that there's a very antagonistic, negative attitude perhaps happening on social media. We certainly don't find that. It's positive to see that. But more interesting is 7% uses the word problem. So what we have found with social media, and we've certainly embraced this very actively on our consumer side of the house, is that this has become a very powerful form of customer care. It's a customer care channel. So when you see social media at number 11 in the Gartner list there, what I would encourage you to do is keep an eye on this one, particularly if you're in a business that's dealing with the consumer. 5 to 10% of our customer care now, depending upon the brand, depending upon the type of service, between 5 and 10% is moving through this channel now. And almost generationally, there's certain consumers that we have who much prefer to use perhaps Twitter to communicate with us with an issue than to pick up the phone and ring or to use a website and to get a ticket number. This has a profound change in how we do our business. And it also has a profound impact on customer satisfaction. The more positively we engage here, the more positive our customers have been to us as a brand, and therefore more willing to stay and buy additional services from us. So in terms of why is this on a cyber risk event, if you ignore this, I think it's a threat to your business. And it can also go both ways, and you need to have an awareness of how it can go both ways. And I'm going to go through some examples on that now. Twitter, we find, is very much a conversation. It's a customer conversation that takes place. And therefore, it's quite constructive, quite useful in getting issues resolved. It's also an excellent way of communicating with a large number of users that you have within your base if there is a contingency event. Now, I was going to show some specific examples from this news article that relates to how the consumers interacted with O2's customer care team, Twitter team, during the outage that they had in the UK prior to the Olympics. However, on consideration, some of the language used within the examples really wasn't suitable for a forum like this. But I would encourage you to go and look at the article. It's very interesting. And it actually shows a couple of things. It shows, first off, how vociferous the conversation can get and how important it is for you to have a policy and an approach to how your agents should handle this. You can't just put people on a seat and say, start responding to those queries as they come in and those issues as they arise. I think it's great that O2 showed a huge amount of fortitude in using Twitter through this particular event, and they also showed great character and humor. And again, some of the examples really are well worth sussing out and reading. Facebook. So Facebook probably isn't as useful in a customer care perspective as Twitter would be. And we seem to see more people who will be less focused on a specific issue they're trying to resolve. It's more general in terms of their opinion. And the point I want to make here is it's a classic example of a service that's outside of your direct control but has a direct impact on your business. So if you look at, say, the EdgeRank algorithm, which is how Facebook decide to put information in people's timelines, a change within how EdgeRank is deployed or run up will have a profound impact on how you're seen. So they made a change in April 2012. And as a result of that, a comment made by one of our customers onto the Meteor Facebook page ended up with 44,000 likes. Right? That's a huge percentage of the people who follow us on Facebook. That's an incident. That's something that you have to contend with as a risk within your organization. You have to have an approach and a way of dealing with it, which we certainly have. But again, just be aware of when you're moving into this space, the impact it can have on your brand. And The reason why Nikki is my poster girl for this stuff, I hope you can read it here yourself. I'm not going to attempt to do the North Clare accent, but if you read the example of this guy, Kevin Falvey, is my hero. He basically invited Nicki Minaj to his Debs on Facebook and ended up with 22,000 likes, and it ended up on Nicki's timeline where the whole world can read it. So read that out yourself in your broadest North Clare accent. But finally, if we look at all of these various technologies, all these various systems, and trying to secure them all, the key point here is there will be systems underlying this. There will be service relationships that will underpin your approach to cloud, mobile, and social media. And you cannot have a fragmented view of those services. You have to have a consistent, common view across them all. You've got to be aware of the context. You've got to be aware of the services that are being impacted. And you have to have an ability to produce the functional views and reports that inform the wider businesses to the condition and where you're at. And this isn't easy stuff to do. And the amount of information and data that has to be correlated and considered and filtered to get to the bottom of exactly what's going on, what's important, that needs intervention and what doesn't, needs automation. It absolutely needs automation to do this in any realistic way for any kind of an organization. That's the whole area of security information and event management, SIEM, and hopefully you'll come and look at what we do in that space over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy.